Hey everybody, it's low carb and keto nutritionist Amy Berger from 2itnutrition.com, helping you do keto without the crazy. As always, do check out the links below. There'll be links to some of the books I mentioned, links to my website, and you can find out where to meet me in person at upcoming events. And of course, if you need personalized, individualized help with your low carb, ketogenic, or paleo style diet, you can hook up with a consultation with me. There, again, link to the Work With Me tab on my website. You can find details on that. And I think that's about all I need to blather on about. Just a quick plug. Do come see all of us at Dr. Westman's Keto Retreat in Beaufort, North Carolina. It's kind of in mid-January 2020. So again, there'll be a link to that. You can check it out. I will be there. And Dr. Westman will be there, of course. Casey Durango from Go Keto with Casey. Christy Sullivan from Cooking Keto with Christy. And Jackie Eberstein. And Jackie Eberstein is going to figure a little bit into this video today because, as I've mentioned in previous videos you may have heard before, Jackie was the head nurse at the Atkins Center for Complementary Medicine in New York City for like 30 years. She worked directly with the late, great, truly great Dr. Robert Atkins. And if you looked at the title of the video, that's what this video is today. We are celebrating the man, the legend, Dr. Robert C. Atkins. This book that I'm holding in my hand, this very copy, this exact copy, is what got me started in low carb and keto, circa 1999. This is the 1999 version. You can't really see on the video. It's totally earmarked, bent, My mother got this at a yard sale, and I don't think she ever read it because she never even did the Atkins diet. I read it when I was home on Christmas break from college one year. But this literal copy, it's not like I read a copy and then bought this one later on. This is the copy of the book that got me started, Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution. It's the 1999 updated version of his original book, which was Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution. So this is New Diet Revolution. That book was from 1972. Now, I haven't read the 72 version in a long time. I thought I had a copy of it over there, but I guess I don't. I could have sworn. Maybe it's on my bookshelf on the lower. No, I don't think I do. Anyway, we have to talk about Dr. Atkins for a lot of reasons. This whole video, everything we're going to talk about, is very important to me personally and professionally, and I hope you're going to find that it's important to you for your own success on the carbohydrate restricted way of eating. And so I guess I'll just return to Jackie Eberstein real quick because I have had the pleasure and the privilege and the honor of getting to know Jackie a little bit the last several months. And I've gotten to hear some stories about Dr. Atkins, the late great Dr. Atkins. Really, I'll just give you a little bit of what I know of him, and then I'll get into really why I wanted to make this video. And this is going to be a long one. I do have a feeling this is going to be a longer video, which is fine. I've recorded like 5 videos today. Some of them were short. This one's probably going to be the longest. I don't know what order I'm going to publish these in, so I can't say like it's okay for me to do a long one because I did so many short ones. They might all get mixed up in the time that I publish. I don't know. I'm just warning you, this is going to be a long one. So Dr. Atkins, in addition to basically becoming world famous for the Atkins diet as a weight loss diet, as a diet for helping blood sugar and all that, he was a brilliant, brilliant clinician. Just a brilliant doctor. He was a cardiologist, and I don't know if everybody knows that. Dr. Atkins was a cardiologist, which is why, he took so much personal and professional criticism when he dared to tell obese, sick people that they could eat butter, and they could eat eggs, and they could eat steak, and they could eat pork chops, and they could eat cheese, and they could eat bacon, but they can't have the bread, and they can't have the potatoes, and they can't have the rice, and they can't have the pasta. He was basically like ridden out of town on the rails. And it's so unfortunate. Like, why? He was a cardiologist. Why would he have staked his professional reputation if he thought this was going to clog people's arteries and give them heart attacks, and all that saturated fat was so bad for the heart? Why would he have done it? Why would he put his patients' lives at risk? Why would he put his professional life at risk? He wouldn't. And anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. My point is, Dr. Atkins was absolutely brilliant. So far ahead of his time. You're going to see, I'm going to read a lot from this book. You will see he was so far ahead of his time. And he wasn't just about the low carb Atkins diet. This is Dr. Atkins' Health Revolution. He wrote many, many books. And so complementary medicine, how complementary medicine can extend your life. He was extremely well educated in the use of supplements and quote unquote alternative therapies. And make of that what you will. I know even people that really, really like and respect Dr. Atkins, or respect his memory, are not so into some of the stuff. You'll see even in this book, very, very into the power of nutritional supplements, very, very into the power of targeted use of like different vitamins and minerals and certain compounds, and chelation therapy, IV, vitamin C, kind of like Linus Pauling style. I think he did a lot of his training in Europe, where that stuff is much more accepted, much more well regarded. Like some of that stuff is considered mainstream medicine in places like Germany and Spain. Like that's normal medicine to them. In that part of the world, it's not complementary or alternative. That is medicine. So anyway, I mean, I've read this book, Dr. Atkins' Health Revolution. This book, what a stunner. Dr. Atkins' Vita Nutrient Solution. If you want to learn about what different vitamins and minerals do, and then other compounds, things like alpha lipoic acid, inositol, other compounds that you might not really be that aware of. Vanadium's a mineral, but like really so educational. I refer to this very, very often for myself personally and for clients, and in a lot of the writing that I do. Really an excellent book. And so my point in showing you all this is that Dr. Robert Atkins, bless his soul, was not a one-trick pony. He was not a weight loss doctor. And in fact, I think Jackie has told me he almost felt like I wish I wasn't so well known for the weight loss like I do so many other things. And this book, Atkins' Diabetes Revolution, was actually written, I know it's really hard to see, Mary Vernon and Jackie Eberstein, they wrote this in his memory. They wrote this after he died. It's based on the medical practice of Robert C. Atkins, MD. This, holy cow, anything with Atkins' name on it, except for the food products, don't buy those. Any of the books are really dynamite stuff. Now, before I go any further, because I was just saying, they wrote it in his memory based on his medical practice, let's clear something up right here now. Dr. Atkins didn't die from the Atkins diet. He didn't die from a heart attack. He didn't die because his arteries were clogged. He didn't die because his cholesterol was high. He died because of a very tragic accident. It was winter time in New York City, and he slipped on the ice and he hit his head, and he never recovered from the head injury that he had. And he was very overweight when he died, but what is missed, like if you look at whatever records were published at the time, he was heavy. He was heavy because he was coked up on medication and steroids from being in the hospital. You know what steroids do? They make you fat. So please never, ever, ever believe any of the vegan, low-fat proponent propaganda that wants you to believe that Dr. Atkins died as having anything to do with the diet or his medical practice or his weight. Okay, that being said, it is, the more I learn about this man and the more I read of his old books, not only the more respect I have for him, the more gratitude I have for his work, the more tragic I think it is what happened to him professionally, and especially the more annoyed I get when even now today, in our own community, in our own low-carb keto community, Dr. Atkins' good, brilliant, beautiful, helpful name is tarnished and demonized and denigrated. You may have heard people say, "Oh, I'm not doing Atkins, I'm doing keto." Like, "Oh no, Atkins is high protein. I'm not doing keto. I'm doing keto. That's high fat." Do you understand that the ketogenic diet is the Atkins induction phase wrapped up in a shiny new bow? Your keto diet, if you are not doing a medically therapeutic epilepsy diet, which was developed like in the 1920s, if you're doing the modern incarnation of a low-carb keto diet, guess what diet you are doing? You are doing the Atkins diet. If you are doing it properly, you're doing the induction phase. If you're a little higher carb, if you are more like me where you're always low carb but not always super strict keto, you are doing the Atkins diet. And Dr. Atkins himself was very careful in this book to emphasize that the induction phase is not the Atkins diet. That's induction. The Atkins diet is the maintenance and potentially ongoing weight loss. The Atkins diet is the longer term, lower carb diet that you use to maintain all the good stuff that has happened. But anyway, so I talk a lot about Dr. Westman's page 4 diet. There's a link to that down below. Page 4 was based on Atkins induction. Page 4 was basically written by Jackie Eberstein. Dr. Westman borrowed it, but I'm not making that up. He says that all the time. He's like, I got this from Jackie and Dr. Atkins. They were my teachers. So if you respect Dr. Westman, then, who do you think trained him? And if you've ever heard Dr. Westman tell the story, he had 2 patients that did the Atkins diet, like back in the 90s, and he was like, "Oh, that'll kill you. Like, what are you doing? Your cholesterol's going to go up." And of course, none of that happened. These patients only got better and better, lost weight, their blood sugar was better, everything was great. And instead of Dr. Westman being like, "Well, I don't understand this, but keep doing it, see you next time," he literally wrote Dr. Atkins a letter and said, can I do research on this? Can I, we need to study this. Like, I don't, Dr. Westman does a lot of research in the clinical setting. He's actually published papers. And he said to Dr. Atkins, we need to do research. Like, I'd like to help more of my patients with this, but I'm not confident enough. I want to see the data. I want to have a clinical trial. And Dr. Atkins said, what do I need research for? I have thousands of patient files here. This is my research. I don't need to do a study. I already know what the study's going to show. I've been showing it for the past 30 years. And so Dr. Atkins invited Dr. Westman to come to New York, come to the clinic, come see it. If you've ever seen Dr. Westman give a talk at a conference, he shows a slide of himself with some medical students that he was with and Dr. Atkins and Jackie at the Atkins Center. Anyway, longer story short, because we're already 13 and a half minutes in, I only know this story because I've heard Dr. Westman tell it like a million times. Dr. Westman says, after being at the center, he's like, well, I still want to do a study. Like, if this is as effective as it looks like it is, we need to tell the world, we need to publish research. Who in their right mind is going to fund a study on a high-fat diet, right, at that time? When fat phobia is still a thing, especially saturated fat phobia, cholesterol phobia, nobody is going to give you funding for that study. The NIH ain't going to fund it. The American Medical Association, nobody's going to fund that. You know who funded it? You know who handed Dr. Westman a check out of his own personal bank account? Robert Atkins. Dr. Atkins used his own personal money to fund some stuff. Now, I know that could be a potential bias, right? We always say, well, who funded this? Who paid for this study? I'm just pointing out that he was on board with like, okay, I don't think we need research because I've got however many tens of thousands of patients I've been treating for 3 decades. I don't need research. I already know what the research is going to say. But if you want to research it, here's some money to go do it, And anyway, let's get back on message. I'm I'm so sad that I will never get the chance to meet him. And all I can do now is say thank you to him. And I know his wife Veronica is still alive, and the Atkins Foundation, I think, still funds research, if I'm not mistaken. They are still actually giving money for low carb research, the Atkins Foundation. So we really owe that whole family a debt of gratitude. And if you have had any success on a low carb diet over the last 30, 40 years, we all owe it to this guy. Now, we owe it to Stephen Finney, we owe it to Jeff Volek, we owe it to, you know, some of you owe it to Jason Fung, some of us, Ron Rosedale, Ted Naiman, Mike Eads, like all of these doctors, some of them have been doing this since the 80s and 90s, some of them are relatively new on the scene, Tro Kalayjian, Sean Baker, whoever. We all owe it to the granddad, to the grandfather of this movement. Some of you might say that like John Yudkin was the leader, or, you know, people that were doing this research earlier on. There were people who were doing the research on sugar, on insulin and stuff, but I mean, Atkins is the one that brought it to the masses. He is the diet doctor that brought it from the ivory tower. Okay, here's what the research says. What does this mean for what the obese type 2 diabetic hypertensive patient in front of me should eat to get better? He was the translator of all that. And the reason I'm doing this video is because I just reread this book for the first time in many years. It's the third time I've read it. The first time was '99. The second time was probably not that long after that. It's been probably over 10 years since I last read it. I just finished it yesterday. Now, my mind was completely blown. I am stunned by what's in a good way, by what's in this book that I don't remember being in this book. And it's probably because the first 2 times I read this, my own knowledge was so much more limited than it is now. Like what I know about insulin and blood sugar and blood pressure and hormones and all that now is so much greater than it was the last time I read this, that when I read it, I either glossed over stuff that I didn't understand or that didn't apply to me, or I don't know what. It didn't sink in. Probably it didn't sink in because I didn't have a lot of the health problems he talks about. My only issue at the time was I was overweight. I was heavy, and I was heavy despite exercising, despite eating my whole grain bread with my light margarine and my whole grain cereal with my skim milk, and I was pudgy. And I have a family history of type 2 diabetes, obesity, stroke, and cancer. So I'm fairly certain that if I hadn't found low carb at the age I did right now, I'd be a health train wreck. But my point is, when I read this book the first 2 times, my sole goal in life was to lose weight. And I'm like not even kidding. That's not an exaggeration. It's not like my only health goal was to lose weight. My goal in life was to be thin. And that's a whole separate video about how I squandered many years of my life being obsessed with trying to lose weight. But now that I've reread this, he was so far ahead of his time. You know, I haven't talked a lot in videos, but on my blog, I've written a ton about the work of Joseph Kraft. And Dr. Kraft is the one who we have to thank for all the stuff I talk about when I say that things like PCOS and erectile dysfunction and, you know, benign prostate enlargement and hypertension and obesity and all of these things can happen in people who have a normal blood sugar but very, very high insulin. And I only found it, now Dr. Kraft was publishing on this in the 1980s. I only learned about it a couple of years ago through Ivor Cummins, who goes by the Fat Emperor, thefatemperor.com, and Dr. Jeff Gerber, sort of his partner in research and work. Dr. Atkins was writing about this, at least in 1999. He mentions Kraft's work, and I don't remember, because I have read the 1972 Dr. Atkins Diet Revolution. I don't remember if that was mentioned then. You know, I just don't remember. But I know at least in 99 he was bringing Kraft's work. He recommended, not for everybody, but for certain people, what's called the Kraft test. I may have mentioned this in previous videos. I've definitely blogged a ton about it. It's the oral glucose tolerance test, only instead of only testing glucose. You know, when you do an oral glucose tolerance test, you go to a lab or your doctor's office, they test your blood sugar, then you drink liquid glucose, pure 100% glucose, and they test your blood sugar at 30 minutes, 1 hour, and 2 hours. The Kraft test is a 5-hour test, so they don't stop at 2 hours. They test at 3, 4, and 5 hours as well. And instead of only measuring your blood glucose, they measure insulin. And this is how Dr. Kraft uncovered this huge problem. And by huge, I mean the number of people affected who you never would have identified that they had a problem if you only ever looked at the blood sugar. But Dr. Atkins had thousands upon thousands of patients with raging hypoglycemia, massive candida infections, yeast overgrowth, obviously obesity, hypertension, hypertriglyceridemia, atherosclerosis, all kinds of heart disease, and of course, type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. But even in the people who were not diabetic because their fasting blood sugar or their A1Cs were normal or maybe only slightly elevated, all of these people had very high insulin. And so it's shocking to me to go back and read this and say, oh my God, Dr. Atkins was all over this 20 years ago. 20 years ago. 99, that's 20 years, right? 2000, yeah. So it's... What else can I say? I have a lot of pages dog-eared that I want to talk about. He doesn't just talk about insulin. He talks about, well, he does, but let me start reading, and then things will come out as I go through some of this stuff that I have dog-eared. Well, before I do that, part of the reason when I said earlier that this video and this particular material is very important to me personally and professionally, and I think it's going to be important to you if you want to be successful on keto, the number one reason people write to me for help is because it's not working. And usually, like 9 times out of 10, people's goal is fat loss. So why aren't I losing weight? What am I doing wrong? And I think some of this stuff will help you. I 100,000,000,000% recommend that you get yourself a copy of this book, Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution, and read it and heed it. And so I've spoken in other videos, right? My whole thing is keto without the crazy. Keep it simple, stop overcomplicating it, keep your carbs really low, everything else is secondary. You will see that in Dr. Atkins' book. And I've even said, look at all the books on my bookshelf. Now, they're not all keto books. They're all nutrition and health books back there. There's only, some of them are keto. There are keto books now that are 400 pages long. I know this looks like a big book, but it's like relatively small. Those big keto books now that are bigger, they've got glossy pages. It doesn't have to be that complicated, And when if you read through this Atkins book, there's zero mention about measuring blood ketones, measuring breath ketones. He does talk about measuring urine, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But at the time this book came out, you couldn't measure blood ketones at home. You couldn't measure breath acetone. You had to be in a lab. You had to be in a clinical trial to even do that. There is zero mention of MCT oil except under one particular circumstance that has to do with lipids, with cholesterol. It has nothing to do with using MCT oil to raise your ketone level or to prolong a fast. There is nothing about fasting in this book. Nothing. Not one word. What Atkins does talk about is the fact that keto is so good for normalizing your appetite that you're just not that hungry. He doesn't say, therefore, you should only eat once a week. Therefore, you should only eat 3 meals a week. Therefore, you should only eat every other day. There's nothing about that whatsoever. I don't even think the word macro or macronutrient is in here at all. And if it is, he says macronutrient only to explain that as a category for carbohydrate, fat, and protein. They are macronutrients. There is absolutely not one word in there about ratios or percentages or adding fat to things to make them more ketogenic, There's nothing in there about limiting protein, and I'll get back to that in a minute. There is nothing even really about fear-mongering about soybean oil or corn oil or cottonseed oil. He's pretty favorable toward canola oil. He does mention that people with some skin issues and certain things, he doesn't really mention reducing the omega-6. He talks a lot about GLA, gamma, I forget if it's linoleic or linolenic acid. GLA, it's a special type of fat that's very good for the skin. I think it's also very good for like fertility, if I remember. But the point is, he doesn't really talk at all about avoiding the vegetable and seed oils. The number one single most effective thing is keeping your carbs really, really low. There's nothing about meal timing. There's nothing about intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. I'm trying to think of like all this other newfangled stuff that's on the scene that was never part of this program. And part of the reason I wanted to read this is to bring myself back to center. Like, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I get confused at this point. I get overwhelmed. There's so many people out there saying so many different things. I don't know what to believe anymore. I'm sorry if that makes me look like, oh, well, then she has no idea what she's doing. No, it makes me human. There's so much out there. I was like, I'm going to go back to basics. I'm going to go back to the simplest, most effective thing that I know works. And it works well, it works easily, it's really simple and uncomplicated, and that is the Atkins diet. And so there's none of that. There's none of that in here. It's really about the carbs. And he talks about things that I think are missing from some of the newer keto books, which is talking about food addiction, more specifically carbohydrate addiction, and talking about how, there are trigger foods. And I guess with that in mind, before I start to read too, something else that's in this book that is missing from the other books is how to do this for life, right? I've always said not everybody needs super strict keto. If you are brand new to carbohydrate restriction as a whole, I think you should be strictly ketogenic. You should experience what it's like to be in the state of ketosis, because you might experience certain things that you don't experience at a higher carbohydrate intake, right? And ketosis is pretty fragile. Some people have to stay under 20 total grams of carbs. They can't subtract sugar, alcohols. They can't subtract fiber, none of that. They have to be really strict. Some people can be in ketosis at 40 grams or 50 or 60 grams or even higher if they're very lean and very active and they do some type of intermittent fasting. The point is, the super, super strict, like 20 grams or fewer per day, total carbs per day, everyone is going to be in a state of ketosis. Everyone will experience whatever unique benefits there are to being in ketosis, like dramatic appetite suppression, much more, physical energy, sharper cognition, the brain fog is completely gone, all aches and pains are gone, like everything's going really well. And Dr. Atkins, that's the induction phase. The induction phase of the Atkins diet was 20 grams or fewer. And it was designed as a 14-day diet, 2 weeks. 2 weeks is enough to get you into ketosis and get you firing on all cylinders to determine, is this something I want to continue with further? And like for 99.8% of people, the answer was yes, I feel so friggin' good. Why wouldn't I want to keep doing this? Now, here's where Atkins really was on the money that's missing from the current crop of keto books. he walked you through, in that book, he walked you through how to increase your carbohydrate intake gradually to find your own personal sweet spot of the amount of carbohydrate that you could eat while still maintaining all of the benefits that you got in those first 2 weeks. Now, he did say you could stay on the induction phase as long as you wanted to. You could do it forever if you wanted to, and he talks about a lot of specific case studies of patients in the books. Like he, just throughout the book, it's peppered with actual patient stories that he has, where there are some people who are very, very metabolically derailed, very metabolically compromised, whatever you want to call it. Those people can't really ever increase their carbs. They have to live in induction. They have to live in ketosis. But there were plenty of people who didn't need to do that. Now, you couldn't go from 20 grams a day to 100 grams a day overnight. There's a very systematic way of introducing it in very small increments, like 5 grams a week. So maybe after 2 weeks of induction or 3 months of induction or however long you wanted to stay in induction, you gradually increase. I'm not going to walk you through the whole plan, but basically either eating larger quantities of the very, very low sugar and starch vegetables that were already permitted on induction, things like spinach, asparagus, lettuce, cabbage, celery, bell peppers, like eating larger quantities of those, or introducing very, very small amounts of higher carb foods. Like after induction, maybe that's when you introduce a 1/4 cup of raspberries a week, meaning every day you have, it's 5 gram increments. So like 5 grams for the whole day. And then the second week, after you've done an extra 5 grams every day, the second week, maybe it's 10 grams extra a day, like half a cup of raspberries, or introduce some other vegetable or small piece of fruit. You get what I'm saying? That's what's missing from the current crop of keto books. And it's why everybody is so terrified of increasing their carbohydrate intake. Now, please hear me. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that everybody should increase their carbs. Some people really do look, feel, perform, and just live their best in the induction level, 20 carbs or less, or fewer, or 30 grams or fewer, something very, very strict. Other people can have 50 or 60 grams a day and either still be in ketosis and reap all those same benefits, or even if they're not in ketosis, they are still very much totally fat adapted, meaning they can have 50, 60, 80, 90 grams of carbs over the course of a day and not have these super, super highs and lows in blood sugar. They don't start to regain the weight they've lost. Their blood pressure stays normal. The A1C stays normal. Like everything is good. And I'm really disheartened by what I see in the keto and low carb community now, where everybody is so scared, literally terrified of butternut squash, terrified of cantaloupe, like, oh my God, that'll kick me out of ketosis, blah, blah, blah. And again, you do what you're comfortable with. But if you've been living in super strict ketosis for a long time and you kind of wish you could maybe eat a little more, Dr. Atkins can teach you how to do it. And it's, it is gradual, it's systematic. Like I said, you don't trip that switch. You don't go from Atkins induction to going to the Olive Garden and having pasta and breadsticks and cheesecake for dessert. Like it's a very systematic, way to do it. And after induction, the next phase is actually called ongoing weight loss, because you're increasing your carbs very gradually, but they're still low enough that you should still be losing weight. Everything should still be improving. And then there's pre-maintenance, which is very short, and then there's maintenance. And maintenance is the most generous carb level, where you're eating a wider variety of carbs, a higher amount of carbs, without triggering recurrence of whatever health problem you put into remission with the earlier phases, whether it was obesity or type 2 diabetes or gout or hypertension or joint pain or whatever. And I wonder if I can find, it's one of the pages I don't have dog-eared, I know. He never, everyone is individual, and he makes a very, he's very clear about that. But right, there we are. Okay. He never sort of says that, and like nobody's going to get to the point where they can eat 200 grams of carbs a day. Now, but remember, Atkins's patients were overweight, they were obese, they had diabetes, or they had hypoglycemia, they had yeast infections, they had PCOS, they had metabolic syndrome, all this stuff. So we're not talking about people that are healthy, that have always been healthy, that maybe can eat 200 grams a day of carbs and it's no problem. Those people do exist. Don't go shaming perfectly healthy people for eating more carbs. Some people can do that. You and I probably can't. So he had the induction, and then there was what he calls CCLL, the critical carbohydrate level for losing. That was your threshold. How many carbs can I eat and still lose the weight after induction? And he says, if you have an average level of metabolic resistance, probably between 15 and 40 grams of carbs. So, 15 is actually less than induction allows. 40, still a very low carb diet. A lot of people will still be ketogenic at 40 grams. If you have a very low level of metabolic resistance, meaning your metabolic problem is not that severe, you might be able to have as much as 60 grams and still lose body fat, still have improvements in health. The critical carbohydrate level for losing. The maintenance level, critical carbohydrate level for maintenance, how much carbohydrate can I eat and maintain all the good stuff I experienced in induction and in ongoing weight loss. The highest amount, now these are estimates, right? Of course, it's only estimates. If you have a very low level of resistance, he puts the range at 60 to 90. 90 grams of carbs is a lot if you're still getting it primarily from broccoli and jicama and zucchini and lettuce and mushrooms. Even if you add in the berries, maybe even a stone fruit, a small peach is maybe 20 to 25 grams of carbs. And if you can maybe potentially have as many as 90, that gives you a lot of flexibility. I wouldn't blow 40 grams of carbs on a cup of rice if I can only have 90, but you might have some wiggle room for one piece of bread or a small thing of whatever. But again, it's all individual. My main point is that he wanted to help educate people in how to do this for life. Because not everybody would want to stay in induction for life. Some people do. Some people feel so great that they don't care. They never want another piece of bread ever again. But if you want a piece of bread, if you want a piece of honeydew, there's a way to do it and not make yourself obese and diabetic again. And so I see too much fear around carbohydrate in our world. Like, people are terrified. And again, you don't have to increase your carbs. Many of us can't. But and the reason the reason I was reading this is because I want to clean up some things about my own diet. And I sort of needed a little kick in the butt, a little emotional, psychological support. And I want to go back to the man I trust. And it's just dead simple. He talks, there's the Atkins food list, free foods. I know maybe you can see it. Can you see it there? I have, when I move my finger, it's the opposite way on the camera. So if I look like I'm drunk and I don't know what I'm doing, that's why. I know it's a little blurry. This says free foods. And it lists meat, fish, and fowl, shellfish, eggs, and cheese. And so guess what's unlimited on Atkins induction? Just the same way it's unlimited on page 4. Fatty protein. There's none of this protein fear-mongering, none of this too much protein will kick you out of ketosis, too much protein will spike your insulin. There's none of that. On free foods, beef, pork, lamb, bacon, veal, ham, venison, in fact, all meat. Tuna, salmon, sole, trout, flounder, sardines, herring, in fact, all fish. Chicken, turkey, duck, goose, Cornish hen, quail, pheasant, in fact, all fowl. He even has unlimited cheese, which on page 4, Dr. Westman's diet, that's limited. But I will tell you, having conferred with Jackie Eberstein a time or two now, there's a reason page 4 limits cheese. People were getting themselves into trouble with too much fat. But the thing is, the Atkins diet was never about adding extra fat. It was about allowing yourself to enjoy the bounty of the land, the fat of the land, allowing yourself to eat fatty foods without, like, you could get your steak, and unlike you were told to do in the 70s and 80s, you didn't have to cut the fat off. You could cook your ground beef. You didn't have to drain the fat. You could eat the fat that occurred. There's nothing in this book at all about adding extra fat. That's one of the big things we see now in the keto world, and why it's like the number one reason people have trouble losing weight. They're too much fat. The other reason is too many carbs. And I said I would get back to the urine testing. There's nothing in here about blood or breath testing because it couldn't be done commercially by a person in their own home at the time this book was written. The urine testing strips did exist back then, and he recommended using them not to gauge how well the diet was working or how fast you would lose weight, because it doesn't work that way. The reason he encouraged people to use it is as just feedback, like, A, am I in ketosis? Am I in this state? And B, it's motivating. Like, if you see the color change, oh yay, it was really basically to confirm whether or not your carbohydrate intake was low enough for you to be in ketosis. And he calls it lipolysis. He rarely uses the word ketosis in here. He does use it, and he says ketogenic diet, but he calls them lipolysis testing strips, which they really are ketone testing strips, because that reagent strip is testing the presence of a ketone, of acetoacetate in your urine. But what the ketones are a reflection of is lipolysis, the breaking down of fat. So, one of, like I was saying, a reason that people get hung up on keto now is too much fat. I think back in his time, because there was no emphasis on add more fat, you need to hit your fat macro. There was no such thing as a fucking fat macro in the Atkins diet. The reason he encouraged the urine testing was to make sure that your carbs were low enough. That was really the big issue in his time, was people just overdoing the carbs, because some of us really are sensitive to the carbs. And I have to say, when I am stricter with my diet, when I'm actually aiming to be full-on ketogenic, because sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, just depends on what's going on in my life and what I want to do. When I am more strictly ketogenic, I do have to really watch. And I do notice I use urine testing strips. I rarely test blood. I do have a meter. It is a myth that urine strips don't work. They do work for like 98% of people. Now, they work for me. I've been eating this way a long time. They still work for me. I think it's untrue that they stop working over time. I think over time, you might just be excreting less ketones, and that's okay. He even says, test your urine to make sure that you're in ketosis, but if your urine color, like if the strip isn't changing color, but you are still getting the results you want, then it doesn't matter and don't worry about it. If you are losing weight and your blood sugar is coming down and your blood pressure is coming down and all your joint pain is gone, your skin's clearing up, if all the good stuff you want to have happen is happening, and your ketone test strip isn't changing color, then who cares about the ketone test strip? It don't matter. So yeah, I notice for myself, the reason I wanted to clean up my diet and be more deeply ketogenic is because I notice some things in myself that do get better. I rarely have problems with physical energy. My skin is usually pretty good. It's my mood really that is the clue. And I never really have brain fog. It's the mood and my mental outlook and my self-esteem, my self-confidence. I know that's weird, but when I'm more deeply ketogenic, I just feel better. And I've been a little too lackadaisical about it. I kind of just wanted to reread this to get motivated, to get re-inspired, to be as strict as I think I need to be. And I'm going on a cruise in July. I wouldn't mind dropping some tonnage before I do. So let me read you some stuff now that I've gone over a lot of the stuff I wanted to go over. Dr. Atkins was a funny man. There's a lot of sarcasm in this book. There's a lot of humor, and you can't blame him. You know, when you are being criticized left and right, you gotta crack a joke. And so I don't have these marked in any particular order, so I'll just read what comes up. He's talking about the progression to type 2 diabetes, how nobody wakes up with diabetes overnight. The high insulin comes first. And I can't believe the first 2 times I read this, I missed it, or I didn't miss it, I read it, but it didn't register because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have diabetes, I didn't care. I was like, all right, doctor, just tell me how to lose weight. I don't even care, just tell me what I need to eat. Now, of course, knowing what I know, this book is a gold mine. A gold mine. If you want to cut through the crap, cut through the nonsense, cut through the confusion, if you don't want a keto book that has 500 pages of recipes, Now there are some recipes in here. There's no glossy pictures. There are some very, very luxurious, nice and fatty recipes, and I'll get to that in a minute. He is saying the progression to type 2 diabetes has been described by some important diabetologists as having 5 stages. And the first 3 stages, those of insulin resistance, hyperinsulinism, and abnormal glucose tolerance, were all present before the elevated fasting blood sugar that allows for an official diagnosis of diabetes. It is abundantly clear that much of the harm wrought by diabetes comes from the unattended insulin disorder present in people not classified as diabetics. Dr. Atkins was all over this 20 years ago. Oh my God. And we all missed it. Dr. Kraft didn't miss it. Dr. Reven, Jerry Reven didn't miss it. It's the insulin, right? First you're hyperinsulinemic, then your blood sugar rises high after meals. Your fasting blood sugar is the last damn thing to rise. Now, like I said, he was kind of cynical. I hate to be so cynical as to suggest that proper diet might adversely affect the thoroughly profitable administration of insulin and oral diabetic drugs, but I will certainly say that if sugar and high carbohydrate diets were denounced from the scientific pulpits as if they were sin, it would seriously compromise a mutually supportive food and pharmaceutical industrial cartel. I love that phrase. The mutually supportive food and pharmaceutical industrial cartel. Like, you know, the processed food manufacturers, the sugar manufacturers being in bed with the pharmaceutical makers. Yeah, you bet they are. Let's see what else. Okay. I know the video, we're at 47 minutes now. Some of my videos in the past were like an hour long, and I know my fans don't care. I really just, I hope you read the book anyway, but I just want to really share some of this with you because I really, he's a hero. He is a hero. And for us now to be like, oh, I'm not doing Atkins, I'm doing keto. Like as if Atkins is this like horrible, terrible thing. I can't tell you how wrong that viewpoint is. It's just beyond wrong. No, I don't think I need to read this. Oh, I kind of do. Oh, I won't read it, but he's recommending that you get the Kraft test. He doesn't call it the Kraft test, but he's saying, I told you on page 88 that you must demand a 5-hour test and that drawing insulin levels is imperative if you are 15% above your ideal weight. He's basically saying if you're overweight, the oral glucose tolerance isn't sufficient for you. You need the 5-hour test with insulin, which is Dr. Kraft's test. He was saying this in 1999. And I have to tell you, like I said, I don't know if the same, it's been so long since I read the 72 version, but the 1999 version that this is was the updated version of the 1992 version, copyright 1992 and 1999 by Robert C. Atkins, MD. So 1992, you know, even more than 20 years ago, what, 28 years ago, 27 years ago? He was talking about the insulin, and it's like the friggin' medical establishment was asleep. Now wait, I folded this down. He mentioned Stephen Phinney way back then. I mean, Dr. Phinney has been researching this stuff for a long time. Why did I fold that down? I don't know. Okay. He talks a lot about why there's so much pushback, or he doesn't really talk about why. He mentions that there is a lot of pushback against low carb and ketogenic diets from the mainstream medical organizations, despite the fact that, again, even as far back as 1992 or 1999, there was already a huge body of data and scientific literature and studies showing that this was really friggin' effective for improving cardiovascular numbers, for bringing blood sugar down, insulin, obesity, blood pressure, all this stuff. Despite that huge body of evidence, there was still so much pushback. And so he talks about cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, he talks about everything. And lipids, cholesterol. By all the usual standards of medical proof, the benefit of carbohydrate-restricted diets on serum lipid levels is an established medical fact. But the paradox is this: because American medicine is more responsive to the dogmatic pronouncements of academicians appointed to consensus panels than it is to scientific research, it is not an accepted fact. It's an established medical fact. It's not an accepted fact, because the fact that you could eat butter and heavy cream and avocados and macadamia nuts, like Dr. Atkins' favorite snack food is macadamia nuts in here. And you could eat steak and butter and bacon and béarnaise sauce and hollandaise sauce and like literally liquid butter and egg yolk sauces like they do in France, and you could lose weight and you could improve your cardiovascular health. Like, other doctors just could not believe it. And now that I hear myself say that, I wonder if part of the reason Dr. Atkins told Dr. Westman, well, I don't need research, like, he probably was thinking, we already have decades of research and no one cares. No one believes it anyway. Why should I waste money doing more research? Nobody's looking at the research because the research is already there and they're ignoring it. All right, what else do I have? I know we're over 50 minutes, but this stuff is just so good. He's talking about insulin and cardiovascular. He's all over this. Now, I mean, he didn't create this stuff. He's citing the medical literature that already existed, and his own patient experience, of course. He's, let's see. I must admit to my great satisfaction, the reasons why a low carbohydrate diet is so heart protective are becoming clearly visible. It is no accident that I have been able to use a low carbohydrate diet to treat cardiovascular disease with ever mounting success. Why should we be surprised? You remember I remarked that this was the natural diet of the human omnivore. People are well fitted to eat fresh meat, fish, fowl, berries, nuts, seeds, vegetables, and in moderation, fruits. Nature is not trifled with, and this was our diet for millions of years, long before the bizarre dietary habits of the 20th century were unleashed to plague us. Dr. Ken Berry calls low-carb keto the natural human diet, or the optimal human diet, or the proper human diet. It's basically exactly what Atkins is saying. This was our diet for millions of years, long before the bizarre 20th century diet was unleashed to plague us. What a great turn of phrase, dude. Let's see what else we have here. He's talking about, like I said, he's got all kinds of patient stories through. He's talking about a man who, a 55-year-old man who was 5'9". He weighed in the mid 190s. He did the Atkins diet, then he weighed 157, back to a totally normal weight. His HDL on the Atkins diet, it started at 35, it went up to 56. That's pretty good for a man. Men tend to have lower HDL than women. And his triglycerides at the start, 341. So that triglyceride to HDL ratio, 341 to 35, what is that, like a 10? That is a walking heart attack. That is a heart attack waiting to happen. Then his triglycerides went to 58. So then his triglyceride to HDL ratio was almost 1 to 1, which is pretty darn good. So anyway, he's talking about this patient with this huge improvement. Is this man on an austere diet? Listen. Patrick has a 2-egg cheese omelet for breakfast each morning, sometimes supplemented by some slices of filet mignon. He has chicken, beef, or fish with a salad or vegetables at lunch, and his portions are large. Patrick has always had a big appetite. At our last meeting, he told me he had 9 pieces of chicken at lunch that day. At dinner, he'll have a large steak or lamb chops or a pot roast or a beef stew with plenty of vegetables. He likes broccoli with cheese and salads with blue cheese dressing. I do too. I love me some friggin' blue cheese. For dessert, he'll have diet Jell-O or some of the treats you'll find in our recipe section. When snacking, macadamia nuts are his favorite. Such austerity, such suffering. And that Dr. Atkins wrote that. I mean, such austerity, such suffering. Although it's true, he has had to give up the cakes and donuts he used to nosh on in the bad old days before he went on the Atkins diet. This is a health promoting weight loss diet, and I put health promoting first because not everybody does a low carb diet to lose weight, right? Some people do it for epilepsy, some people do it for migraines, some people do it for gout, they do it for all kinds of reasons besides weight loss. But so it's a very, very health promoting diet where you can also happen to lose weight if you want to, while you are eating like royalty. And he's got something in here that basically talks about that, eating like royalty. Where is it? I thought I folded it down. Perhaps I did not. Could have sworn I did. Here it is. Here it is. We know that so he's talking about low fat diets and So he's talking about low-fat diets and whether they work and whether they're satisfying. And I think he's saying that low-fat diets can work, but these diets work better. Yeah. We know that low-fat and satisfying diet aren't equivalents. Just consider the expression, "he eats like a king." Was the mental picture it produced of a rather dry-skinned, austere-looking fellow wearing a crown and munching on a carrot? I doubt it. Fat has earned its place in the cuisines of the world because of its luxurious, satisfying taste, its richness, and its capacity to satiate appetite. Fat is par excellence the food of feasts. If they were of a tougher material consistency, butter and cream would undoubtedly be referred to as the backbone of fine cuisine. But you know what I mean, and so do the heart-healthy French, who put one or both of those fatty delights into as many dishes as will take them. And I have to say, I'm not counting my carbs yet, so I don't know if I'm under 20 or not, but I've been noticeably, deliberately stricter with my diet, and I am eating more fat, and I feel good. I feel slimmer, but I think that's because I'm drinking more water too. It's kind of a long story. I was just in Brazil for a conference, and I drank hardly any water. I wasn't doing my normal stuff, and I was really bloated when I came back. So most of that is probably just the water loss. But I really do think, you know how I said earlier, one of the biggest errors that we see people make now with keto when the goal is fat loss is that they're overdoing the dietary fat. You're eating all this fat, your body has no reason to tap into your own body fat stores. This is less of an issue when you are well and truly ketogenic, truly 20 total grams or fewer, not net, don't subtract fiber, don't subtract sugar, alcohols, nothing, 20 total grams. You can eat more fat. It's still not unlimited, but I think you have more leeway with oils, with butter, with cheese, with things like pepperoni, macadamia nuts, very fatty meats. I've noticed that in myself because when I'm eating a lot of fat and gaining fat, it's usually because my carbs are higher than they should be. It's never like 200 grams. I never wake up and have pancakes and juice and toast for breakfast, but it might be a little too, I'll have one piece of that, I'll have that. That's the kiss of death, the combining the sort of lazy keto. I hate that phrase, but that's sort of lackadaisical. You're not really sure. You have no idea how many grams of carbs you're eating, but you're eating tons and tons of fat because you're on keto. That is the absolute metabolic fat loss kiss of death. If you're struggling, if you're still getting the results you want, then do whatever you're doing. If it's working, keep doing it. I'm talking to people where it's not working. And that's really, this is the kick in the butt I needed to remember. The fatty meats are unlimited. The fat, the oils, they are unlimited, but you cannot kid yourself about the carbs. You cannot like pretend that you're really actually ketogenic when you're not, which again is why he did recommend the urine testing. Now I think there was one or two other things that I folded down. Let's see if it's even worth reading. Diabetes, I know there was something else maybe. Austere diet. Low fat diet. Oh, I said earlier in this video, we're at the hour mark. I'm going to keep going just a few more minutes. I hope you're watching. Thanks for bearing with me. This, again, to me personally, this is probably one of the most important videos I've ever done. I said earlier that Atkins really zero fear-mongering about regular conventional meat, regular conventional food, regular eggs, soybean oil, corn oil, no specific, instructions to avoid that stuff. However, he does, give a little nod to the grass-fed beef and the pastured, free-range, blah, blah, blah. He's basically saying, if you can afford it, get the better stuff, if at all possible, he says. My recommendation to you is that when you eat animal food, just as when you eat plant food, you should go out of your way and even pay the extra few cents to get unpolluted organic food if at all possible. If at all possible. Frequent health food stores, buy free-range chickens and their eggs. And then he's talking about a specific cattle rancher that he knows that, be free of any taint of hormone or antibiotic. But, he doesn't say that the diet's not going to work if you don't do that. His practice, remember, his practice was in New York City. He probably had a lot of wealthy people coming to him who could afford that stuff. I have a feeling that he wouldn't, in today's day and age, he'd probably say, just keep the carbs low. And again, if you can afford that stuff, do it. There's something, I want to double check what I just read about that better quality, because I think he was talking about it in relation to cancer. And again, Atkins, so freaking far ahead of his time. Is it in the cancer section? No, it's not. I thought he was talking about it in terms of like preventing cancer, like eating organic food, because he mentions the Warburg effect. Some of you have no idea what that means, but those of you who know the work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried, the connection between chronically high glucose and insulin and cancer, and how cancer cells selectively like really, really love glucose. And that's a whole separate, that could be a whole separate 20 videos. I'm not going to go down that hole right now. And I'm not saying that glucose and insulin cause cancer. Like, don't hear that, because it's not what I'm saying. But glucose is a very, very good, very powerful fuel that cancer cells can use. That doesn't mean sugar causes cancer. It just means cancer cells really, really like glucose. And so I just remembered incorrectly that he was talking about like organic food and pastured food in relation to like reducing your risk for cancer because of carcinogens or whatever. That's not what he was talking about, which is good. All right. I think that's it for now. I'm going to stop reading, but I so highly endorse this book, recommend that you get it. If you want to send a couple of cents my way, buy it from my Amazon affiliate link, which I'll have down below. I just really, truly had my mind blown knowing that this was written 20 years ago, or if a lot of this was taken from the 1992 version, then even further back. And what a brilliant man this was. What a tragedy and a travesty it was that his professional reputation was tarnished the way it was, because had we listened to him in 1972, had we listened to John Yudkin in the 1960s, we would not be where we are now. Wouldn't be there. And one thing I want to say before I forget, he talks about, I said he talked about carbohydrate addiction and binging. He's got this section. Okay, I don't know if you can see it. It says, but what about my bad habits? Yeah, sometimes when I put books up to the video, it's clear and you can see it, and sometimes not. It says, but what about my bad habits? And, he's basically saying that there are some things that you're just going to have to give up for the rest of your life. You are just going to never have to eat them ever again. And there might be other foods that you can have once in a while that you're not going to binge on, right? Like there are, I don't know. I don't want to give an example, but it may have been a hard week at work. And when you get to the weekend, one of the things you definitely intend to get into is a little modest pigging out, or perhaps not so modest. I too enjoy binges. The question really is what type of binge. Parade magazine did a food survey in November 1991, and when they asked people what foods they usually binged on, the first 5 answers were chocolates, desserts, cookies, ice cream, and candy. I would prefer that you binge on protein/fat foods. I say that not because you can't gain a pound or 2 if you put away too many 2-inch thick steaks, but because protein foods are fundamentally self-limiting. Everyone has eaten 30 cookies at one sitting at some time in their life, and many carbohydrate addicts have done it hundreds of times. But how many people have eaten 10 hard-boiled eggs at one sitting? People just don't do it. Protein and fat foods satiate appetite quite quickly. It really isn't possible to go on munching them endlessly, and hardly anyone desires to. That doesn't mean that a chicken breast doesn't make a delicious snack, and that combined with a few other things, it doesn't make a delicious minor binge. The crucial fact about protein foods is that they don't unleash a metabolic tidal wave in your body. Very few people get a protein addiction. Your blood glucose level doesn't sharply rise and fall when you sit down to eat a Western salad. Okay, I'm going to skip the next. I don't want to scare you with the prospect of never eating another piece of grandma's pumpkin pie. If you weren't an uncontrolled carbohydrate addict with severe obesity that only this diet has been able to cure, then you probably could indulge occasionally. Only you know how addicted you are to the sweet stuff, and that's the real test. If you aren't addicted, then you have room to maneuver. The occasional slice of pizza or the ice cream everyone seems to enjoy just might be permissible. But be careful. When those first 5 pounds go back on, and they will, take yourself firmly in hand and get back to your ideal weight. And I think, again, what a brilliant, kind, decent, human man. He's saying, we're all freaking food addicts. Some of us are more addicted than others. Some of us are more addicted to carbs than others. Now, he said something there like, I would rather, if you have to binge, I'd rather you binge on protein and fat. And his idea of a binge might have been different from yours and mine. I don't know. But if you guys know the Dr. Tro Kalayjian, he's very active on Twitter. I'm a big fan. He's not for everybody. He's got a very brash, very abrasive style. He doesn't phrase things. He doesn't dance around. He'll just tell you like it is. He says the same thing. If you feel out of control with food, if you feel like, it's just, I don't know. If you need to binge, if you need to turn to food, turn to fat and protein. Don't worry about the calories. Don't worry about fasting. Don't worry about the timing. Don't worry about the macros, except for keeping the carbs really, really low. If you need to eat 3 steaks, eat 3 steaks. If you need to eat a whole strip of pepperoni, eat the whole stick of pepperoni. Like, binge on fat and protein. And it's not that. There are no consequences to that. There are. The consequences are much less severe, metabolically speaking, than binging on sugar and starch and flour and all that. And I firmly agree with that. You know, in an ideal world, we would all be able to control our eating all the time, every day for life. For those of us where that magic hasn't happened yet, myself included, I definitely feel it's metabolically safer, so to speak, to overdo, to binge, whatever word you want to use, do that on protein and fat. It's not a good idea. I'm not encouraging you to do it. I'm saying if you have to do it, here's the way to do it with the least issue. And he says like, oh, it won't cause this huge blood sugar fluctuation. It does in some people. There are some people, especially with the mood stuff. Like if your problem is just weight, that's different. If you have like a psychological thing, you could have a big blood sugar dip if you eat too much protein. That's a whole separate issue. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but what a great human being Dr. Atkins was, and what a loss it was for us all that he's gone now. And I will put a link to Jackie Everstein's website. I think it's controlcarbohydrate.com or Control Carb. She is still active. She does consultations herself. When I get a case that's too complicated and it's like I don't know what to do with this person, I send them to Jackie. And especially if they're on a lot of medication I'm a nutritionist, I'm not a doctor. I never adjust medication. All I can do is give people information to discuss with their doctors to talk. She's an RN. As a nurse, she can't, I don't think she's a nurse practitioner, so she can't really like change medication either, but she's more educated to like talk to people about their various medications and what they need to do. So anyway, she is still around, still kicking, still giving talks. Like I said, she will be with us in Beaufort, North Carolina in January 2020. And she's the co-author of the Atkins Diabetes Revolution. And I feel so privileged to know her and to sort of know Dr. Atkins a little better through her, to hear the stories. She tells a story of, he was really persona non grata in the medical world because of what he was doing. Never mind the success he was having, what he was telling patients to do was so far outside the mainstream, so far outside what they thought was safe. Oh my God, you're telling heart attack patients to eat butter? You're telling obese people to eat cheese? Holy crap. It was so far outside the mainstream. And not just that, from, like I mentioned earlier, the complementary medicine aspect, totally separate from the weight loss diabetes Atkins diet practice. He had that chelation, IV vitamin sort of practice. He and Jackie had a deal where, she would walk from the subway, walk to their office every day. And he said, if you're ever coming toward the office in the morning and you see police cars, go immediately next door and call my attorney. They had like this plan. Don't even come to the office. Stay far away. Don't even approach. Go to the diner across the street and call the lawyer. Because they kind of felt like they had a target on their back, right? Somebody was going to be after them for doing what they were doing. And what a shame. Because he and his work and Jackie's work and everyone they learned from, not just him, but, Dr. Kraft, Dr. Reeve, and T.L. Cleve a long time ago, Yudkin, all these people, they're 100% vindicated, 100%, 1000%. Every single one of us that has had any success with any variation of a carbohydrate restricted diet owes it in large part to this man. Most of the books that have come out, all those fancy schmancy keto books on my shelf, have done nothing to improve upon what he put on paper over 20 years ago. And it's not that those books aren't useful and that they don't have their place in the movement. I mean, they're great for cookbooks. But if anything, they're muddying the waters. They're talking about all these things that don't matter, all the MC2, all the fat bombs. You know what's not in here? Fat bombs. Zero. I don't think the word fat bomb is in here. Now he's got Swiss cheese wrapped in bacon that's fried. I mean, you could call that a fat bomb. He doesn't call it a fat bomb. He calls it Swiss snack. And there's a sweet cheese snack. It's cream cheese with eggs with sugar substitute. It's like a little sweet creamy cheese thing. He doesn't call it a fat bomb, but there was no deliberate macro chasing, no percentages. So the books from today, they're useful, use them, but let's not ignore, let's not forget about the tried and true that every single one of those books is based on anyway. So if they're based on it, why not go back to the original source? And with that in mind, I got to give kudos to Ted Naiman. You know, Ted really looks at the medical literature, like from the 50s and 60s and even further back, before there were review boards, when you could do like really crazy stuff to patients in a study. But even just looking at the metabolic studies, the for lack of a better word, I mean, there were studies on this in the 50s and 60s on low carb, higher protein diets. So he goes back to, I mean, this isn't primary medical literature, but, you know, Dr. Naiman goes back to those primary sources. He's like, I don't want to listen to so-and-so doctor on stage giving me a talk. I don't want to look at their slides. I want to go to the research they're citing. Let me see what the actual research says. And like, that's what Dr. Atkins did. And that's his book. And that's what, you know, I'm going to stop talking, but we just owe this man such a debt of gratitude. I cannot say enough good things about him. And I'm going to link to a blog post that I wrote about this, where I said, if you are completely 100% overwhelmed and confused and you have no idea how to even start because there's so many different people out there saying different things, or if you've been at this for a while and you still feel totally overwhelmed and confused and you have no idea what to believe, buy this book, read it, and do it. Take out the complication, take out all the stuff that doesn't matter, that you don't need, because all of it, not all his patients, the vast majority of the patients that he treated who stuck to the diet as written did really well. Without the fasting, without the MCT oil, without the fat bombs, without the macros, without God knows what else, without measuring their blood ketones. Thank you for listening. Rest in peace, Dr. Atkins. Thank you so much for being you, for giving us your life's work. And I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.